Looking further into Act 3 then, and looking at Act 3, Scene 4, we see Macbeth's hallucinations take on a much stronger presence in his life than previously. In Act 2, he saw a dagger, but it was private, and it was only for his eyes. Now in Act 3, he has this hallucination in front of all of his lords and vassals. So this clearly is coming from a heat-oppressed brain, which in Act 2 maybe was a fever, but now certainly seems connected to his guilt. There's some questions scholars ask about these two quotes. He says himself, "I have a strange infirmity," and his wife says, my lord is often thus and hath been from his youth. And so some scholars wonder if this is a cover story, which certainly it could be, or if this might not be the truth, that Macbeth has been afflicted in some ways in some sort of hallucinatory fits or things like this. But certainly the words that he said back in Act 3, Scene 2, line 41, ring clear here. Full of scorpions is my mind, dear wife. And what we're seeing is a Macbeth increasingly unhinged, a Macbeth almost in the sense of his brain crawling, that he's unsure of where he's going, and he's been afflicted by this pestilence. So here's an image then to kind of depict the deterioration of Macbeth's mental state. In Act 1, the end of Act 1, he says, false face must hide what the false heart doth know. And so paradox is kind of seeping in. He's opening the door to what's to come. In Act 2, there's this sense of the false creation, dagger of the mind. He's already guilty even before he commits this murder. And so that's beginning to enter the room privately. Nobody knows about it. But now, as he faces off against Banquo's ghost and screams, "Never shake thy gory locks at me," we see this public appearance of his insanity, that he's tried to keep these things to himself, and he can't. You'll remember in Act 1, we said, is it possible for someone to live at odds with themselves? And Macbeth here is showing the consequences of that. You really can't. You can't, at least according to Shakespeare in this play, be at odds with yourself and have that go well. So a couple things then about the marriage between Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Most notably in Act 3, in the plot to kill Banquo, Lady Macbeth isn't a part of this. In Act 3, Scene 2, she asks what's to be done about Banquo. And Macbeth says, be innocent of the knowledge, meaning don't worry about it, I got it under control. Why does he keep her in the dark? Perhaps this is a protection of her innocence. He doesn't want her to be further marred, but it could speak also to a loss of trust between the two of them, that now that he's kind of taken on the role of king, he doesn't need her as much, and he doesn't rely on her as much. Certainly, by the end of this, the Weird Sisters have become his primary source of advice. He's no longer looking primarily to his wife, but he is seeking the Weird Sisters. And so Lady Macbeth here is taking on more of a corollary role. She's supporting him. She was so dominant in Act 1 and Act 2, but in Act 3, she's not really on the stage, and she's only on the stage to cover for Macbeth and because of Macbeth, not in any way for her own ambition or goals. So Macbeth at the end of Act 3 is in a crossroads. He says, I am steeped in blood, stepped in blood so far, that should I wade no more, returning were as tedious as go o'er. And what he's saying here is that this is the moment of no return. This is the moment where he recognizes he's in like the middle, and he has options. He could go back. He could no longer seek further destruction for himself. He could try to make amends and make resolution. But he makes a willful choice here to continue moving forward. So he's heading to the Weird Sisters in Act 4. He's headed to them hopefully to be reassured and to be given greater knowledge to help him in his future dealings with the heirs of Banquo and other things that threaten his crown.